Hello, everyone, and welcome to a wonderful new episode of this StudioMEcast. I am your host, and today we have another special guest. We have Max Cianci, who is a filmmaker here in Pittsburgh. He also works at the Carnegie Museum, and we're going to be talking about a lot of his work and what he's got coming up and just about filmmaking. And so today I'd just like to say, Max, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with just you're a filmmaker. I really like your short film Loopy in particular. I know this is a little while back. You're also the head of Carousel Filmworks as well. And but you're in the marketing department for the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do there?
Sure. At Carnegie Museum of Art, I produce all of their video work for the marketing department, but a lot of it just ends up being like for the museum as a whole. I started a little over a year ago. I had worked with them where the person in my position had left and they were contracting for like certain video projects, and we had ended up getting a contract for a job that they needed. And I loved the museum. I've always really loved going to the museum. It's just been a place that, I don't know, the thing I really like about Pittsburgh. So whenever we got the gig, when I say we, I mean my friend Ralph and I, who I work with mostly, Ralph DeLulo. I was so stoked because I was like, wow, what a great organization to be able to like make visual work for. So we did some projects with them and it went really well. And during that time, I realized they had a spot open, like a full-time position open. And I talked with them about it and I applied and I ended up getting the job. So where I'm at now is I'm doing that full-time, and then I'm basically also doing Carousel full-time as well. And I really love it. I mean, it's a really cool organization. I really enjoy going into work to a place where there's so much to show. Like, first off, it's such a beautiful building. The exhibitions are beautiful. The art is so diverse and all over the place and in such great ways. And there's so many stories all over the place that you kind of, just today I was walking around there and I was like, man, I'd love to do a piece on that, or I'd love to do a piece on that. So there's just a lot of opportunity. And the staff there are really just incredible people because they're so passionate and they're so intelligent about what they're talking about. I feel like I'm doing a plug on the museum.
No, I love it.
It's honest.
No, I love the museum. And I used to work next door at the Carnegie Library.
I forgot that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah. And
the library's great. I was just there the other day too. It's great.
It's support your local library. They've got free DVDs. The foreign film section's amazing. You got more Japanese samurai films than you can shake a stick at, and Blu-rays galore. Just come on, guys. And books too.
And the musical instruments. I went in there the other day and I was like, they've got a freaking, what do you call that thing? That's like a metal rod that you move your hands and it makes...
A theremin.
Yes, they have a theremin there. I was like, I can play the theremin.
Yeah, they had that on display. It's like the theremin zone taped out on the floor.
All those synths. Like, I don't know. I like didn't visit the museum barely ever until I started working at the art museum. Or I'm sorry, I didn't visit the library until really I started working at the art museum more often. But since then, because it's right next door, I'll just walk through it or whatever, and they've got a beautiful keyboard. They have a whole area of like all these cool synths and like switchboard synths and stuff, just like free for you to walk in and play. But yeah, love the library. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, that's great. I love it.
I didn't mention a book. That's
okay. No, they've got tons of them there. Like, there's so many, they're throwing them away, which is sad. But it's because they've got so many. But I love both of those things. It's I think it's so cool that you are in this position to work at the museum. Now, how was this your first time doing, like, I guess, a full-time position in media?
Yeah, really it was. And that was one of because I was hesitant to take the job, to be honest, because it was a big jump because I was just freelancing before. So it was a big change for me. I kind of had to wrestle over the fact of like 9 to 5, for X amount of hours a week, like I am devoting to this institution. But through that hesitancy, I was like, I feel like there are strengths here. Like, I feel like one thing about the freelance thing was like, I needed a little bit more structure in my life, So It was my first full-time job. I mean, I PA'd on film and TV for a while, but it's like that's energy is so all over the place that it's like doesn't feel like a full-time job. It almost feels like it just becomes your life for a while. So this was my first like in-house creative thing, which was, you know, it's been a process learning how that there's a lot of, you know, you got to learn the workflow of like approvals and all this stuff. But I'm glad I made the decision. It's been pretty cool, and I've learned quite a bit from it.
Absolutely. I remember going through a similar thing when I had my first job in marketing, and I was a little wary of it because a lot of why I became a filmmaker was I didn't really seek out the 9 to 5 structure, I guess. Wasn't necessarily against it, but it wasn't something that I was dreaming of having. Right. And but I got to use that opportunity to also improve a lot of my personal skills, where it's just, even if I'm not necessarily editing something that is purely my creative vision or you know, whatever it is, I still was working at a higher frequency than I was before. And I was able to get a lot out of the work that I had in marketing to, you know, kind of experiment with some more things that, like, hey, I want to get faster at editing. Hey, I want to get more familiar with this program, or like, yeah, I'll see if I can put in a request to get this particular lens because I think it will work with the project, and I'm also really interested in that. What kind of things have you been able to learn as a filmmaker while on the job doing that?
It's a good question, because I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to say something first. I think one thing I kept in mind when I took the job was I got into this whole thing to be a filmmaker, and that is what, in my heart, that is what I want to do. And my position is called digital content producer. So right off the bat, I'm like, I didn't get into this to make content. You know, I feel like there's this weird connotation with that word. I got into this to make films. So I try to look at everything. I know, and this is honest, like everything that I do is like as much of this little passion project in my heart that I can, that I try to think about it and craft it and polish it to where I don't just end up making these videos that like, here's another video, you know. I know they're not films, but in my mind, I treat them with the same respect as much as I can. And I think that keeps me, I don't know, it keeps my heart in the right place, my intentions in the right place. But what have I learned as a filmmaker? I'm editing a lot because of the amount of material the frequency of the material that we're producing. So I feel like it's kept me very sharp as an editor. You know, like I've learned Premiere I knew it, but like I'm using it almost every single day now. So I'm thinking about the edit a lot. And I always do, but like it's just kept me sharper as like a technician. And I think I've learned, like, I don't know, with that sort of a situation, communication skills are important. And similar to when you're on a film set, like you're dealing with all of these different departments that need to weigh in on this project, and learning how to confidently express your vision to all of these people and how to receive feedback well, you know, in a constructive way. So those two different areas with editorial and like, kind of, I look at it like a leadership sort of diplomacy sort of thing. Those are two of the cores that have kept me sharp as a filmmaker, but also going to work every day and looking for something new and looking for a new story and looking for a new opportunity. That's kept me sharp as a filmmaker as well, looking for potential wherever I can see it. Yeah, those are a couple of ways that it's kind of kept me sharp.
Now, what are the kinds of things you're clearly very passionate about filmmaking?
I hope so.
So what is it that has inspired you the most to have this passion? Was it a film you saw? Was it like a filmmaker or an experience you had on set? Where did you get the bite from the bug?
Well, to be honest, I have always appreciated storytelling. I've always appreciated storytellers. My parents, but especially my dad, would surround our house with a lot of the time very interesting people that had very interesting stories to tell. So I was around that when I was growing up, and I never connected that with film, but I connected it from a sense of like what it is to hear a compelling story, you know, and it's a story that just like takes you out of the room and you're just there with them. And I was like, man, even as a kid, I was like, I felt the power in that, and I thought it was so wonderful and incredible. And then I fell in love with, you know, my dad had a camera, and I found photography, and I remember loving photography, like instantly. Like I was just like, man, this is so cool, because I always dug composition and how an image was composed. Before I was even thinking about motion, I was like, the composition was interesting. And then eventually they bought me the video camera, and just the other day I remember always kind of fooling around with like the potential of like, as a young kid, I remember having this little camcorder. I wish I remember what it was, but I remember like putting my fingers in front of the thing and like opening up like it was my eyes, and it was like a POV, and messing around with transitions, like putting a basketball up to the camera and then like taking it away and you're looking at something else. I don't know. Like I just was fascinated with the visual stringing together of things and manipulation of things and storytelling of things. So anyway, that's more of like the technical side, but I never really took it too seriously. Like it was more of like, this thing feels good, but then I would just go off and do something else. And then when I was a senior in high school, my friend, who's a very important person in my life named Chase Brown, he kind of came to me and he was like, I want to make a film. I want it to be a short film about, we used to have this thing in my high school called it was like Mr. Hickory pageant, basically was like against drinking and driving and drugs, after school special type thing. And it was kind of like this thing nobody really, I don't know, it was popular once, but not as popular anymore. And Chase is like, I want to make a film to replace that. And I was like, cool. That's, you know, we had done YouTube videos together before, but I was like, let's do it. And long story short, we made this film. We put so much energy into it, so much time, and we like, it ended up being, I think, like a 30 or 35 minute long thing.
Oh, wow.
Like it was like a thing. But back then we had no relative like that was a big project. But we just spent so much time in it. We really cared about it, and we premiered it to the school. And I remember turning to Chase in that moment and saying like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And that was almost 10 years ago, you know, and I've like pretty much stuck to that sentiment. I think I said like, we can do this for the rest of our lives, whatever. Like it just for once felt like, gosh, I really love this, you know, and I've been looking for something to really cling to, and I feel like this is it. So long-winded answer, but like that really was it for me. Like I just found something I just loved that was storytelling through film, and pretty much since then I've just pursued it as much as I can.
That's fantastic. So. Yeah. So now from that point where this is what I want to do, at that time, what were your favorite types of films, and have your favorite types of films changed since then?
Yeah.
All right,
I think that's an interesting question, because I think like, it's like with anything with art, like as you experience life, your view on that piece changes, you know, like if you watched, I don't know, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly when you're 10 compared to like when you're 25 compared to when you're 50, or, you know, it's, you're going to experience it differently. And so what were my favorite kind of films back then? Like, it's funny, like, cause when I was a kid, it's kind of a hard question, because I remember my dad would take me down in the basement, and we had a TV screen, and like he would like screen things for me, and he would say like, this is a good film, you know, like take it seriously. And it would be like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly or something. And the way that he had a good way of like setting a scene, in that like I would sit there and I'd be like, whoa, I gotta zone into this, you know? So some of those films that he showed me at that point, like I really liked The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I loved Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you know, like that was like formative to me. I loved The Jerk with Steve Martin, you know, like there were a lot of comedy films that I just absolutely loved, because I loved to laugh. But it wasn't until, to answer your question, like change, like when I went to film school, and then I really started watching so many more films, you know, that I kind of learned like what I liked, what was kind of working for me. And then, so it just kind of like shifted, you know, as time went on. And I'm at a place right now where, you know, I do love the horror genre, but like more of a niche thing of like, I love the comedy horror genre. I think it's such a fun space to play in. Like, that's why I love like Peter Jackson and Sam Raimi, and we've obviously connected over that. Of course, yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It changes as things go on, you know, but I love comedy. I love horror. I love adventure. I love movies that have wonder, you know, and like incredible music, and movies that make you want to go out and do something. And so, yeah, that's what I like.
That's wonderful. Yeah. A lot of the things that you're saying about your father really remind me of my dad in a lot of ways, because my storytelling is definitely something that was front and center in my home life. And whether it was, having a Texas Independence Day party and hearing the story of the Alamo every year, or my dad is a professional musician, so the family ritual was he would go travel for his gigs, and then he'd come back often with a suitcase full of gifts, and as he passed them out, he would tell us the stories of his travels. And so that was something that we always did, is he'd be there and we'd listen to, what have you been up to, Dad? And some of the stories he brought back were like insane. It's like when you're a professional bagpiper, you can have a very interesting life. And,
I bet.
Yeah,
I can't
like
imagine.
just even going to places that you might not immediately expect for a bagpiper to go, like Doha, Qatar.
Wow.
Because CMU has a campus there, and CMU doesn't do anything without bagpipes, apparently. And so he would go over there to play for CMU graduation, So,
how cool.
That or Greece, where Greece was cool because he was able to bring the rest of us with him. So at a very young age, I got to go to Greece, which was right after we had gone through, classic mythology and all that stuff. So it's like I just learned about this, and then we went to the places where, but also the way that films are presented.
Right.
And I'd say my mom definitely helped with this, and it's carried on. It's continued to be a thing between my brother and I. Is like we'll still get together to like show each other a movie or something, and but going to a movie with Dad, or like saying like the whole family sitting down. And my parents just being like, all right, this movie is called Dr. Zhivago, and we're going to watch it because you need to be familiar with the classics. We really, we watched films for fun and entertainment, but it was also presented as an art form in my family, where it's like, hey, you should know what the Mona Lisa is, whether you're into painting or not. It's like you should know about these sculptures, you should know about this, and you should see these films at some point in your life if you're gonna, function as part of humanity. So there's definitely that, which I think is insanely helpful for parents to cultivate an environment like that, and it can carry on in our lives as with us. Now you have continued since we continue with your story here. You've made a bunch of short films, been well recognized by a lot of film festivals, and also the Pittsburgh City Paper a couple of times as well. Congratulations!
Yeah, thanks.
And
second place
this year, but last year was third place. And so next year, who knows? Who knows? You also have a couple of projects that you're looking to be, I'm not sure if you said you started writing them or not, but why don't you tell us a bit about your these two projects that are coming up, and what you're looking to do as far as, what the projects are, funding, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, thanks. I have two short films that I have written. The one, I would say I'm at the point with the script where it's like, there's one sort of plot change I'd like to make, but other than that, it's pretty set in stone. The other one has some dialogue that needs some work, but it's pretty, both of them are in a pretty good spot, like that they could be working drafts that like a pre-production could begin. Or, the actual preparing for building a set or finding a location and so on. There are two films that I've been working on for a little while, honestly. Like I would say at least like the past 2 years that I've kind of been sort of, and they're simple ideas, but kind of really like developing and thinking them through. And the one is it's basically a story about, if it kind of is within the Amish community, and it's about a young girl sneaking out of her house to go do something. And the other is about this group of this family, grandfather, father, and a son. They're out in the woods and they're trappers, and they trap something that they don't know what it is. It's not an animal they've ever seen before, and the mother is coming to get it. And those are kind of like the general ideas. They're very different in feel, but they're both very close to my heart from the sense of, I think what I would want to get from it's called 10-watt Yoder. What I would want to get from 10-watt Yoder is that feeling of being a little kid and sneaking out of your house to go, hang out with your friend in the park or something like that. Something that when you're that age, it would be the biggest deal on earth to get caught. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like this Indiana Jones moment of sneaking through something to get somewhere, even though in reality it's no big deal.
It's almost like innocent trouble.
Yes,
in a weird way.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm trying to channel, because I think I gravitate towards stories like that because I felt that way, when I was a little kid. I loved that rush of doing stuff like that, Yeah. And I've never really fully made a piece like that. So I'm really excited to get into that. And I want it to be full of, there's barely any dialogue in it, which I love pieces like that because it's just about visual storytelling, and watching something happen. So I'm really thought a lot about camera movement, and I've really thought a lot about the storyboarding of it, and everything feeling really intentional and really motivated. And I think it has the potential to be, I think if I made this the way that I want to make it, it will be my favorite thing I've ever made, so far. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece is kind of just rich in tension and horror elements and kind of there's a lot of silence to it. There's something in the woods. It's right on the edge, and I'm really excited for that. And it's also a monster piece, and which is a full creature build and a big creature reveal and stuff that I've met some people in Pittsburgh that I'm hopefully, if it still works out, I'm really excited to partner with because they're incredible craftsmen in special effects. So yeah, I'm kind of teasing these things. I don't know how much I like.
Well, but awesome. Well, let's talk a bit about these projects and how they relate to the work you've done before. Mm-hmm. Have you done a creature film before?
No, I really haven't. So that's but I have so much respect for them, especially from I do feel not an obligation, but I feel a respect for Pittsburgh's history in creature filmmaking. Mm-hmm. And I would be honored to create something that is in that lineage of what has happened before. Yeah. And I think that's another push for me is in my time in Pittsburgh, which I've been here for almost 10 years now, pretty much. Moved around a little bit, but pretty much 10 years. I would love to have a mark in I did make a monster movie here. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Pittsburgh definitely has a background in that. And if filmmakers don't continue to do it, then it won't be a tradition. Right. It's you should.
Yeah, no, and that's what I mean. We kind of have this little, as long as you're into it, you have this little bit of an obligation of if you're into that genre, you should try to do something like that.
I'm not really, I used to say I'm not that into horror. That has changed. The horror films that I finally have gotten around to seeing, I love that genre. Yeah. And, but I never had that much of an interest in making a horror movie before. But now I'm I would love to try that out. Yeah. It's so, all right, well, creature film, that's good. Now, this other film, say the title again,
10-watt Yoder.
10-watt Yoder. Mm-hmm. All right, so what genre does this fall into?
Yeah, I've thought about that because it's not a comedy. It's Like what genre would you say is E.T.? Like adventure, sort of like...
There's some adventure, there's some sci-fi. I'd say it's probably also a bit of a coming-of-age story.
Sure, yeah.
A bit of a buddy film in a weird way.
Sure.
Maybe not. You could, but because genres can be a little fuzzy on where their boundaries are,
which is fine.
Sure.
Which is fine because I think it's hard to put something in a box and just say that's what it is. But I think because for me to call it a drama, like there's a lot of I don't know, lightness to it. Where it's like I think Spielberg plays in that space really well, and he's definitely someone that I obviously, think about when I think about these sequences that would play in this film where like the way that I've kind of written it is like the mother figure is this sort of grim, imposing figure that's kind of looming and that is our main sort of antagonist. And she has this sort of like horror, fear element to her. But, in reality, it's her mom.
It's
like there
horror.
isn't...
Yeah,
right.
It's less of the mom's evil, perhaps, and more of I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah. So it's... I would say if I had to categorize it, it's sort of like this drama, but also like I like to think of it as like it's a little bit of an adventure story. And I think that idea of like I said, like I dig adventure stories, but as independent filmmakers, it's hard because we're told like... keep it simple, keep it low numbers of people, like keep locations down. And it's like, but it's sort of that challenge of like, how do you have an adventure film in a house? And that's kind of what prompted me. Honestly, like one of the things I've sort of thought about with this film is like, can I make this really rich adventure film that's just about a kid sneaking out of their house? Because that's how it feels, So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
That's great. 'Cause I think if I had to pick a favorite genre, I would probably pick adventure as... It's
great.
Yeah. And in a weird way, I think for me, sometimes I think of adventure films as... I'm not even sure exactly where I define that blurry edge, but when I say adventure films, I don't even always mean action films. You know what I mean? Like you can have an action film that isn't specifically an adventure film, right? Most adventures have some action in them. Not all, but some, and probably most. But yeah, I'd say that's something that's been pretty consistent for me because when I was a kid, I loved adventure movies, and I always wanted to go on an adventure, but I also kind of thought adventures weren't real in some way. And maybe I thought that because a lot of adventure films kind of like they blur into like some action or some war movies or battles and, hearing that, hey, war isn't actually fun, and that kind of thing. And then when I got even older, I found out from some people, it's like, well, some people actually love this, but fortunately, as I got a little bit older, I was able to go on some adventures and find out, hey, these are a real thing. And, but I still maintain that love for that genre. So anytime someone says, oh yeah, I want to do an adventure, my ears perk up, especially because of what you said with independent filmmakers. That's not a genre you hear about a lot. You usually hear something like, oh, it's not just, but it's a drama or it's a zombie film, or some kind of like horror is pretty popular amongst independent filmmakers, which kind of confused me because I'm like, those do have a lot of, special effects a lot of the time, and that's sometimes the hardest thing to do. So if you're trying to keep it easy, why is it horror, But I'm kind of inexperienced with that genre on a lot of levels, so maybe I just don't get it. But maybe because they can be easier to write but still be entertaining. I'm not even sure what it is.
I don't know.
What do you think?
I think, think about the Blair Witch Project, for example. Like that is an idea of like some people out in the woods that have a video camera, and the directors, I think there was 2 directors, they had a very unconventional way of like the way they filmed it. That's neither here nor there. The reality is the production value was very low, but it yielded, I think for a long time, they were like the highest grossing film of all, or I forget the term. The ratio from budget to final, what they netted or whatever was the spread was humongous.
Yeah,
Obviously. So
they even sorry to jump in on that.
Sure.
They even refunded the cameras they shot on to Best Buy.
But what I'm getting at there is like I think that there is something with horror. It feels that audiences are more open to maybe a newer actor or lower production quality or, you know, X, Y, and Z, as long as they can get hooked by the scare or the fear or the horror. And I think that is this unique thing. And I think it's sort of similar with comedy maybe too, where like if something is funny enough, people will stick around for it. But with different genres like drama, you know, like you've really got to be invested in this thing, you know, which I think tends to make filmmakers, you know, spend and invest in, whether it's an actor that needs to nail a performance, you know, like, which that's money and that's time and that's understandable. But I think that with horror, you can, yes, the effects are incredibly important. But there's almost like there's this built-in audience that exists that is kind of like I wish I would have seen this for the conversation because I don't know that much, but I know a recent example is like the Terrifier film. Have you heard of it?
No, I don't. I don't think I have.
This isn't good content then because neither of us have. But if somebody's watching this and they have, I think that's a recent example of this happening. But anyway, I just think that it's a very good space that if you can study horror film enough and if you have enough of a passion for it and you have a fresh enough idea, it's a great space to work in. Whereas like the idea of like an adventure film, when you're low on a budget and production value and this and that, like it can be a bit more when you're thinking adventure and you're thinking like big like a Star Wars or a Fellowship of the Ring or something, that's whenever it's like for you to say like an adventure seems unobtainable because it's like if you're comparing it to things like that. But in my mind, like if you think about the spirit of an adventure, you know, like I think that's something you can do simpler than you think if you come at it from that sort of a place. And that's what I'm trying to do.
That's good. Well, let's gravitate talking more towards something that we have experienced in.
Yeah. This whole podcast should be talking about movies we haven't seen.
Well, I want to talk about some more a bit about your inspirations as a filmmaker, right? And then how, like, my line of questioning that I have in mind at the moment is, you know, where your inspirations are and where you have taken that to, I guess, find your own voice or how you are continuing to develop your own look for things. But your short film, Loopy, once again, enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you.
And there's something that you do in that film a few times that I don't see people do as much these days. But at least one particular famous filmmaker was known for doing a lot, which is you actually will zoom.
Right? Dude, I love zooms.
No one zooms anymore. Everyone dollies in.
I agree.
You know, and I know why, but I see you're doing these actual zooms, which if anyone doesn't know, the difference between a zoom and a push or a dolly in has to do with if the camera is physically moving when you're getting the shot, that's a dolly or a push. There's a tracking shot. There's a bunch of names for it. But a zoom is where the shot itself, the camera is stationary, but you're just blowing up the image, all right? And you'll see this a lot in a bunch of Stanley Kubrick's films. You know, it's just a zoom. And there's a lot of reasons why it kind of went out of fashion in the last decade and a half or something, maybe more, I don't know. But in your film, you do that. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And did you have, now my initial thought with that was, oh, this is a bit of an inspiration from a lot of Stanley Kubrick's films. Was that on your mind while you were doing it? It wouldn't be a hot take for you to say that Stanley Kubrick's been inspiration for you, but was that something that you picked up from his stuff, or like how did you come about by doing that? Because it's definitely a choice that most people, especially lately, don't make, which I appreciated and I liked. I liked what it gave a weird tone and feel to it. Well, why did you go with that?
Well, I appreciate it. And Loopy was co-created by myself and another filmmaker named Anthony Peduzzi. But the zooms, the inspiration was the Wicker Man, the 70s Wicker Man.
I love that movie.
That movie's, but if you remember, there's some really great, incredible little zooms. And I remember, I think Anthony and I watched that movie together. And I watched it. And if you haven't, for anyone that hasn't seen it, they should definitely watch it.
So hang on, just in case, because I almost never get to meet someone who's seen this movie, where we can talk about it. So spoiler alert for the original The Wicker Man, not the Nicolas Cage one.
Yeah.
We're going to talk freely about this film. If you haven't seen it, please check it out and let me know what you think, because I always ask people, what do you think about this? Because it took me a long time to figure out if I even like it or not, but I kept rewatching it with people. So go ahead.
So I had never even seen the Nicolas Cage one, and I still haven't actually.
That's all right.
I watched this movie, and because this was during COVID, we produced this film, and early, like I think we made this in like March or April of like 2020. But during that time where he and I, because we were roommates, we would watch a bunch of stuff together. And we ended up, I think, watching The Wicker Man. And I was like so moved by how haunting it was. Because like for anyone that hasn't seen it, essentially brass tacks, like person goes to an island looking for someone. And this island is very weird. And within this, you're kind of like with him as I feel weird explaining this to you, but you're kind of with him as he's like exploring this place. And through this sort of atmospheric search, the camera sort of has a sort of voyeuristic tone to it, where you're kind of like, this is how I remember it. It's honestly been a while since I've seen it, but I remembered it as like, it's sort of a voyeur in the distance. And through that, you kind of have this zoom where you're kind of like slowly going towards something, which I think was also a product of the time as well, and like Kubrick's work and stuff. But the zooms were so haunting to me, because it was just like, there was just something about it that I just like, it stuck with me. So anyway, when I was just, I would go on these walks during COVID because it was like, looking for something to do. And I walked up to that building, and I remember I was on the phone with my mom at the time, and I had the headphones on, and I was looking up at that window, which if you've seen the film, like that's how the film begins, where like I am in it and I'm looking up in this window, and these drapes are like bellowing and they're being sucked in. And I think at that moment I saw it as like this Wicker Man moment of like that's really freaky. And I think at that time too, I was like, what is the scariest thing I could see up there? And it would be like myself. And I was like, whoa. Nothing like groundbreaking, but I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of freaky, you know? But anyway, that was the inspiration for the Zoom. That's how I kind of first like wanted to put it into practice. And it just worked out that the camera that Anthony had had a zoom function that was like not just him actually zooming. Because
it's a steady one. You can pretty much always tell the difference between there's a zoom button versus someone
that's hard
trying to do that
to be able to handle
an
it.
even way. And
that was Anthony. And Anthony really it took a while, but like he nailed those zooms, and it's tricky to do even with the little toggle switch, like
because they're pressure sensitive too. So it's like you can even speed it up and everything. I think one of the reasons why zooms look so weird to us and why a lot of people don't use them so much is a lot of people try to make their films in a way where you forget you're watching a movie, which whatever. Anyway, you forget you're watching a movie, and our eyes don't zoom in real life, versus like we move around, we can move in, and we see this shift of perspective. But I'm so pleased with that answer about the Wicker Man, because I watched that movie and I couldn't quite figure out, like, in a weird way, I don't want to say if I was underwhelmed or not, but at first I wondered, why is this film so significant? Why is Christopher Lee saying this is like the best film he's ever been in? Sir Christopher Lee, excuse me. But then I think that is the movie that I have shown to more people more than any other film, aside from maybe The Lord of the Rings, where hey, have you seen The Wicker Man? And they say no, and we watch it. Like, aside from Lord of the Rings, because if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings, I'll pretty much make sure you watch it with me. But The Wicker Man is like probably the next most common one. And most of the time I rewatch it with someone who hasn't seen it, which is a great way to watch a movie. And there's so much more that I've gotten out of that movie on repeat viewings that maybe everybody else got the first time they watched it or second time. Yeah, even little things like I should remember the name of this, but the pole that the kids are dancing around with the ribbons. Yeah, I think maypole. I forget. Sorry, Celtic ancestry. But it's like you have this scene where they're going around and around and getting tighter and tighter as it braids and all that. And then the next scene in the schoolhouse, the inspector opens up the desk and there's this nail with a bug. And it's going around in this circle. Yeah. And it's getting wound tighter and tighter and tighter until it's like gonna die. Yeah. And then the second time you watch the movie, you're like, that's exactly what's happening to him. They're all in on it. They've put this whole thing, and he's getting wound up the entire time. And it's like, you think, why doesn't the bug just turn around? Why isn't it just undo? Why is it doing that? And it's like the same reason why he's keeps doing this. It's like, so stuff like that in the movie, or how the innkeeper, I think it's the innkeeper, toward the beginning, there's the one picture that's missing of the girl the inspector's looking for. And inspector's like, why is this picture missing? And the guy's like, oh, well, it broke. There's another picture right there that's broken. That the guy's like leaning next to, like almost point, oh, it broke. He's like, you see? Like just taunting him with this. And there's even more to just a lot of the themes that come through in that film, but I love talking about that movie. And it's an incredible movie, and it's very unique. It is very unique, and it's a movie that is, I don't know, you're just kind of, it was also funny to watch it. Like, I watched that, when did I watch it? I think it would have been before or after Midsummer. I saw Midsummer, and a lot of people compare those two, which I think is totally fair. Like an outsider comes to this place and it's slowly revealed that this place is like not what they thought it was, which isn't necessarily a new story, but I think like the comparison to draw between those two films is very fair, and I did it myself. And I think both filmmakers did it in interesting ways, but I think the subtlety and the patience and the restraint of The Wicker Man is incredible. And the filmmaking of it is so, I don't know, it's just remarkable, and it's so quiet, but terrifying. And it's also like a musical. Like, you could actually open it as a musical on stage somewhere. Like, I'd be surprised if no one has at this point. I would say, from a filmmaking perspective, directly, but I think also subconsciously, The Wicker Man had a heavy hand in Loopy. And I think like one thing about Loopy that I wanted to try to accomplish was like, I always looked at the camera as, I brought it up earlier, but like almost thought about it like as soon as he enters this building, it's almost like a security camera, as much as I could, or as we could, or it's like it's up in a corner, or it's like a voyeur, and we're kind of like, I don't know, sometimes at some points we accomplished that, and some points it was just more, subjective camera. But yeah, it was just, love The Wicker Man. I'm glad people liked Loopy. It was a super fun film to make. Well, going off of that with The Wicker Man and stuff, we've talked a bit about your inspirations there, including with Peter Jackson and so on. Now, what would you say at this stage in your journey as a filmmaker, what are some of the things that you feel or hope define the type of work you do when it's on the screen itself? Like less about, like, we can talk about your process and all that, but less about like, oh, well, I work with drawings, or this is how I write the script by hand or by typing, you know. But like when it's up there on the screen, what do you think how would you define a lot of what you leave up there, and what you're heading toward as well?
No, it's a good question. And I don't know, if I had to say like my motivation of what I would want, because I'm understanding this is kind of like an audience takeaway question of like what I would want them to perceive, is, I don't know, like the word wonder comes to mind a lot to me, because I feel like I spend time out of each day kind of like wondering, in wonderment, if that's a word, about like the world and life.
Me
and
too.
Like sadness.
Can you talk about that? Where do you see wonder? Because I think I'm the same way.
I just think the world is like an incredibly interesting place, you know, that like I have a hard time like not paying attention to a lot of the time. And I think that there's so much, you know, there's a lot of good things, there's a lot of bad things, and everything in between, but I am in wonder of it, you know. And I think in my pursuit of what I want to do with filmmaking, it would try to channel that, and it would try to show that, and I would be exploring my wonderment of things, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So I feel like that's kind of like not a full answer, but like that is that when you asked me that, like that's the word that came to mind. And I also like selfishly, I want to entertain people. Like I want to captivate people. I want to like lock somebody into something and have them along for the ride the entire time. Like that is like, I remember when we were working on, Peter and I worked on a 48-hour film competition together. And whenever I directed it, and whenever my motivation behind that was, I just want to lock somebody in their seat. I want to have them locked on the story, and I want to have them captivated the whole time. You know, that was more of a logistical thing, but like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to have somebody on the edge of their seat. I guess it kind of depends on the project. So like this is kind of a couple parted answer. But I want to entertain. I want to show a bit of wonder about the world, and I want to show people the way that I see things, which I think as artists, you know, that's our task. Is we're not just here to, you know, purely objectively document something. We're here to show people the way that we see something. And that is my goal through any film that I'm trying to do. I guess would be those three things.
I enjoy that answer quite a bit. I think that one of the prevailing notions I see out there in a lot of media, and maybe this is just what's being served to me on the algorithm, but because there's more stuff being made now than ever. But whether it's people talking about AI or multiverse theory or any number of things, I see a lot of cynicism and nihilism, and there's a big part of me that's like, I'm not dismissing the reality of a lot of those things, except multiverse theory. It's not true. This is it, everybody. You get one shot. And like, sorry, I have my own rant about multiverse stuff. Like there's, I like Rick and Morty. I like a couple of other films that I won't say just in case because it's a little bit of a spoiler, but there's a really big, awesome film that came out recently that had a lot of multiverse stuff in it, and I loved it. But geez, I've seen so many people whose like their mind just gets not their mind, but their spirit just gets totally crushed by this nihilism of like, oh, there's an infinite number of me's. What's the point? I'm like, are you going to choose that this is the reality where you're going to be a pessimistic loser? Yeah. Like, what's the deal? Like you have, fine. But that being said, man, I'm being critical. But that sense of wonder, and I think there's also been almost a second death of magic that culturally we've been experiencing. where now it's like the American mythology is UFOs and stuff, which I think is I actually think is a good thing. You know, I have some people, I've met a couple of people who tell me, I'm not going to teach my kids about Santa because I was traumatized or something. And I'm like, you know what? I think that it is very dangerous, and we would actually be losing something substantial if we eliminate the folklore of our culture. You know, and maybe that's just me being Manx here, you know, and but there's this sense of wonder that we can have for environments or whatever it is. And I think having that sense of wonder or exploration or adventure is actually a good thing, and is something that is not just good, but is necessary to have, I guess, available in not just content, but the pieces that people create sometimes. I think anyone can make anything that really happens, all right? You know, and then some stuff that isn't true if you like. But I like that you focus in on that.
I do, and it's funny, like, because like I brought up that these are stories that I've kind of held with me for the past couple of years, but I would say even like most recently, like, it's funny as things sort of change as you get older and your focuses change. And like one thing I've been thinking a lot more as filmmaker with somebody who wants to tell stories, I want to above, or not even above, but alongside the things that I mentioned that I would like for an audience to take away, I think as like any sort of artist, if you can sort of embody a feeling or an experience or an emotion that you have that someone else in the audience probably has, and if you can show it visually or however, whatever your medium is, but if you can really successfully show it in a creative way on screen and express it through a scene or a performance or a film as a whole, like, that is an incredible thing. And I think that's more like, you know, these films that I talked about where it's like adventure and wonder and horror, like these are things I want to accomplish. But if I had to say like longer term goals, like it's more of that latter of like that, I don't know, that just really being able to showcase and make someone feel and figure out and maybe help them discover a way that they're feeling or something they're expressing. I feel like I'm getting a little heady, but I hope the point is clear enough.
Dude, that's what inside baseball is totally what I'm here for.
Yeah, you know, like that's
what it's all about.
Right, that's what I'm trying to, you know, I've been thinking about that more lately. And I think honestly it's partly with the art museum where it's like you go and look at these pieces and like it's, you know, it's someone, I feel like I'm not at liberty to say this, or not at liberty, but I feel like I'm not like, I don't know about art that much, but it's, you look at a piece and it's
you
someone.
You work in a museum.
It's someone.
You make art as well. You know.
It's someone trying to create something that is them trying to express a feeling or a thought or something that they have. And I don't know, I want that to be more plugged into my work than it ever was before. Like that's definitely a motivation of mine now. Yeah,
almost like using cinema as a language to communicate.
Exactly. And it's a matter of like not necessarily starting with a plot. Like I feel like I would do that more before where I'm like, here's a story I want to make and then kind of like find the meaning out of that sometimes. But starting with that feeling and figuring out where is the plot from here.
Do you think the feeling is also, do you conflate that with having a message or a moral in your film, or are you leaning more toward an emotional experience?
I think I would lean more towards an emotional experience because I'm an emotional guy. But I think that if you have that thing that you're trying to say, or even you're trying to figure out, maybe you don't even know what this thing is you're trying to figure out, and you figure it out through this thing that you're creating, I think inherently a message will be there. Whether it's the same message for everyone in the audience, you don't know, but I think a message will be born from that, you know? And I don't know, I've kind of been looking at filmmaking in a little bit more of a fluid, emotional way recently that I'm really excited to like get into and start to create. And I think that in the past, a lot of the ideas that I've made are like bigger production ideas where they're like a lot of people, a lot of big production elements, like all these things, which are wonderful. And I want to continue doing that. But I almost want to like have that and then also have these lighter projects that are just maybe like me and a couple actors and a couple locations and a story or a feeling and a hook and just like, fuck, go with it and see what happens, you know, like that makes me excited too, just as excited as the other thing. So I really forget what the original question was.
Oh, it's just asking about like messages versus emotions, you know.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I like that too, because I'm all right with having a story that has a message in it.
Sure.
But when you have a message that has a little story wrapped up in it, that's when I think it's like propaganda.
Absolutely.
A lot of the time, you know, whether it's political or not.
Sure.
You know? And when you aren't necessarily trying to just drive home this particular message, but really showing like, here's what this character learned, or here's what these people are feeling, then I find that as I've gone through life as someone who's an audience member, who's watching films, the characters that I identify with in some of the films that I love the most have changed. You know, like when I first saw Lord of the Rings, I identified with certain characters that like maybe I was like, oh, I recognize that trait in me, or I want to be more like this person, or whatever it is. And then in the last few years, some of that has shifted a bit, where I start looking at this other character and realizing maybe I've got more in common with them, or maybe there's this other character that has more a virtue to them that I didn't value as much or in the same way, you know, because I didn't think it was as cool or whatever. And I'm like, you know what, that's really where I think I need to be headed right now. You know, that's part of, you know, what makes a work of art alive, even beyond maybe what the creator itself originally intended, is we're navigating, this is what I believe, is that we're navigating a medium, in this case cinema, which I believe cinema it's a real thing that's out there, and we don't like we make movies, okay, but we didn't invent cinema. Like we discovered it. And in the same way that a lot of mathematicians argue about whether math is created or discovered, right? I'm the same way with cinema, except I go with, this is a real thing out there, and we are discovering it and working with it. It's a language that already existed, and
that's
it took us. I really believe that.
Yeah,
and
I never looked at it that way.
This is where I get really controversial, and no one agrees with me. People think they do, and then I get into it. I haven't found anybody who agrees with me on this. I don't believe art is actually subjective in that way. I don't think I'm always... Like, I don't think I know everything. This isn't an arrogant claim here, all right? Quite the opposite. I believe that cinema, despite my opinion, all right, exists as I don't know if metaphysical is the right term or not, but I believe it is part of the universe, as already there. Before cameras existed, cinema existed. And it took us this long to discover it, just like it might take us any amount of time to discover another planet or something. I'm still trying to figure out some of the balance of, you know, discovering cinema versus we're the ones making the movies.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
You have thought about this quite a bit. This is the most, like... I've never heard this take. I think the question of like what is good, like good, is an interesting question, especially like, you know, when you're speaking about something like, you know, art, where like, you know, most people would default to saying it's a subjective thing. But I was very interested to hear your take on how art is objective. Which that's a pretty bold claim. Yeah,
and it goes deeper. I can tell you more later, because it goes like all the way down, not just with art, but it really is into how I view the entire world, and like down to
that's where it seems
morals, ethics, right, wrong, all that. Right. Like it does.
I got that from that.
All right, cool.
Because it's like
alluding to it
with that big of an opinion. It doesn't stop at like what is a good painting and what isn't a good painting. It seems like you're talking about like a standard.
It's
something.
definitely my worldview.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So.
I am going to have never thought about this too much. If I'm going to have to think about it, because I'm definitely on the side of I do think art is a subjective thing, but you've given me a lot to think about.
Well, one of the cool things is whether I'm right or wrong, at least other people have been able, including yourself, to make films that I enjoy, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, as they say, there's many ways to skin a cat, you know, which I said that recently, and then I remarked, I don't hear people say that as much as I used to. I wonder if
You could say like fillet of fish.
Yeah,
maybe there's not that many ways of fillet. I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably, I would go down to Woolies and ask them. But yeah, well, fantastic. Well, obviously, you and I could talk about cinema and life and art and wonder and our fathers forever, I'm sure. But that's just about it for our time, I think. Now, people, before this goes up, I'll ask you for like, hey, any links people want to learn more about this guy, follow him, all that stuff. Hey, everybody, it's The Modern Age. You know, get in the description. And so that'll be that. I'll follow up with you there. Cool. But thank you so much for being my guest. I'm glad we were able to do this. I'm looking forward to these 2 projects you have going on. And I'm due back for another visit to my beloved museum.
Yeah, please come by.
I love it. And if anyone out there is on the fence about going to the Carnegie Museum of Art or Natural History, take it from me, the Hall of Architecture, just that is like a surreal, awesome.
It's beautiful.
You're just going to want to sit there for a while.
And the Hall of Sculpture too. There's so many beautiful rooms in there.
They're portals into these totally different environments.
It's pretty cool. So yeah, if anybody wants to come, find me. I'll be running around somewhere probably Monday through Friday. But thank you for having me, Peter.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
It has been.
All right, everybody. That's it for our show. And if you just can't wait for the next one, you're in luck because there's probably some you haven't listened to yet at this point. And you can just go on back and go through that. And, you know, just wait till next time and we'll be here. Bye-bye. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to start your own podcast, why wait? Reach out to us at StudioME.me, and I hope you hear me again soon.